The microphone screeched, a high-pitched whine that cut through the celebratory music. My hands, slick with nervous sweat just moments before, now clenched into fists so tight my nails bit into my palms. All eyes swung towards my brother, Chad, as he stood grinning, the cheap beer in his hand sloshing precariously. He raised the mic higher, his voice booming through the suddenly silent backyard, and I knew with a sickening certainty that this wasn't going to be a congratulatory toast. They thought they knew me. They were wrong. If you've ever felt the sting of family betrayal, knowing that the people who should love you are the very ones tearing you down, subscribe now to join a community that understands the pain and celebrates the strength it takes to rise above it all. My graduation party. A milestone. Proof that I, Harper, had finally clawed my way out of the shadow of my family's expectations. Years I'd spent sacrificing, studying late into the night while they partied, working double shifts to pay for books they deemed unnecessary. All of it, every agonizing moment had led to this. A degree, a future, a chance to finally breathe. Growing up, it had always been Chad who received the accolades, Chad who was the golden child. Star quarterback, effortless charm, destined for greatness, or so everyone thought. I was different. Quiet, bookish, ambitious in ways they couldn't comprehend. My dreams of becoming a doctor were met with polite smiles and thinly veiled skepticism. Harper, that's wonderful, dear, but are you sure you're cut out for it? It's such a demanding field. My mother's words, coated in sugar, always carried the same underlying message. Know your place. Chad's failures were excused as youthful indiscretions, mine were amplified into character flaws. When he wrecked his car, it was a momentary lapse of judgment. When I questioned the rising cost of living, I was difficult. So, graduation was my victory, mine alone, or so I believed. The tension in the air thickened as Chad began to speak, his words slurring just enough to betray the number of beers he'd already downed. He launched into a rambling, nonsensical speech about family, about loyalty, about expectations. I felt my stomach clench. This wasn't just drunken rambling. There was malice behind his words, a carefully constructed cruelty that made my skin crawl. He paused, grinned again, and then dropped the bomb. Let's raise a toast, he announced, his voice dripping with sarcasm, to the family black sheep, the one who finally managed to graduate. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the stares burning into me, the pitying glances, the barely concealed amusement. My parents stood frozen, their faces a mask of uncomfortable smiles. No one intervened. No one defended me. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a painful reminder of my isolation. Years of feeling like an outsider in my own family, years of striving for their approval, all culminated in this public humiliation. The pain was a physical thing, a crushing weight that threatened to suffocate me, but beneath the pain something else stirred. A cold, quiet rage. They thought they had broken me. They thought they had won. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. I plastered a smile on my face, a tight, brittle thing that felt alien on my skin. Let them think they'd gotten to me. Let them underestimate me. Because while they were reveling in their petty victory, I was already planning my revenge. The person I trusted most in that moment was myself. I knew that if I lashed out, if I let my anger consume me, I would only be playing into their hands. I would be confirming their preconceived notions about me. So I did the only thing I could do. I stayed silent. I raised my glass, offered a weak smile, and played the part of the dutiful daughter. But inside, a storm was brewing. And when that storm finally broke, it would wash away everything they held dear. They had mistaken my silence for weakness. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. The aftermath of Chad's little speech hung over me like a shroud. The congratulations felt hollow, the smiles forced. Every well-wisher seemed to be offering a pitying glance, as if to say, poor Harper, she finally achieved something, but even that was tainted. I went through the motions, thanking people, accepting gifts, but my mind was miles away, replaying Chad's words, dissecting his intent, searching for a way to undo the damage he had inflicted. Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. I would lie awake for hours, the silence amplifying the taunts echoing in my head. The weight of their disapproval pressed down on me, suffocating my dreams, dimming the bright future I had worked so hard to build. I tried talking to my parents, attempting to explain how deeply Chad's words had affected me, but they dismissed my concerns as oversensitivity. He's just teasing, Harper, you know how he is. Their casual dismissal felt like a betrayal in itself, a confirmation that my feelings were insignificant, that my pain didn't matter. They were more concerned with maintaining the illusion of a happy family than acknowledging the deep-seated issues that festered beneath the surface. Their indifference only fueled the fire within me, hardening my resolve to prove them wrong, to show them that I was more than just the family disappointment. Driven by a desperate need to escape the suffocating atmosphere of my family home, I threw myself into preparing for medical school. I buried myself in textbooks, spending countless hours in the library, fueled by coffee and sheer determination. But even in the quiet solitude of the library, I couldn't escape the whispers of doubt that plagued my mind. Was I good enough, smart enough, strong enough to succeed in such a demanding field? Chad's words had planted a seed of insecurity that threatened to undermine everything I had worked for. I started doubting my abilities, questioning my decisions, second-guessing my every move. The pressure became unbearable, a constant weight on my chest that made it difficult to breathe. I tried to confide in my friends, but they couldn't understand the depth of my despair. They saw me as the overachiever, the girl who always had it together. They couldn't comprehend the vulnerability that I had so carefully concealed for so long. My attempts to bridge the gap with my family only widened the divide. I tried suggesting family dinners, game nights, anything to create a sense of connection, but my efforts were met with resistance. Chad would make snide remarks, my mother would offer thinly veiled criticisms, and my father would remain silent, effectively condoning their behavior. Each failed attempt chipped away at my hope, leaving me feeling more isolated and alone than ever before. One evening, after a particularly disastrous dinner, I confronted Chad directly. I told him how much his words had hurt me, how they had undermined my confidence, how they had made me feel like an outcast in my own family. He simply shrugged, a smirk playing on his lips. "Get over it, Harper, it was just a joke." His callousness was like a slap in the face. It was then that I realized that he wasn't going to change. He enjoyed seeing me suffer. He reveled in my pain. And in that moment, any lingering hope of reconciliation vanished. The rejection from my family fueled my determination to succeed, but it also created a deep-seated anger that threatened to consume me. I started having nightmares, vivid dreams in which I confronted Chad, unleashing all the pent-up rage that I had been suppressing for years. In my waking hours, I found myself fantasizing about ways to get even, to make him feel the same pain that he had inflicted upon me. These thoughts terrified me. I didn't want to become like them, consumed by negativity and spite. But the desire for revenge was a powerful force, a dark current that threatened to pull me under. I knew I needed to find a way to channel my anger, to use it as fuel to propel me forward, without letting it destroy me in the process. My breaking point came a few weeks before I was scheduled to leave for medical school. I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen, their voices hushed but their words clear. They were discussing my future, my chances of success, and their doubts about my ability to handle the pressure. "She's just not cut out for it," my mother said, her voice laced with pity. "She's too sensitive, too introverted, she'll never survive in that world." My father didn't disagree. He simply sighed and said, "Maybe she should just find a nice husband and settle down, that's what she's really good at anyway." Their words were like a dagger to my heart. After everything I had sacrificed, after all the hard work I had put in, they still didn't believe in me. They still saw me as nothing more than a disappointment. In that moment, I felt a wave of despair wash over me, so intense that I considered giving up altogether. Maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe I should just accept my fate and resign myself to a life of mediocrity. But then, a flicker of defiance ignited within me. I refused to let them win. I refused to let their negativity define me. I would prove them wrong, not for them, but for myself. I would become a doctor, not to earn their approval, but to show myself that I was capable of anything I set my mind to. And I would do it on my own terms, without their help, without their support, without their love. The day they tried to break me was the day I started planning my escape. The weight of their words settled over me like a toxic fog. Each breath I took heavy with the realization that my own family saw me as a failure before I even began. I retreated into myself, the vibrant colors of my dreams fading into a dull, monotonous gray. The acceptance letters from medical schools, once symbols of hope and validation, now felt like mocking reminders of a future I was ill-equipped to handle. Doubt gnawed at me relentlessly, whispering insidious lies that chipped away at my resolve. I stopped attending study groups, convinced that I was slowing others down. I avoided my friends, ashamed of the vulnerability I had briefly revealed. I isolated myself in my room, surrounded by textbooks that seemed to mock my inadequacies. The once familiar scent of paper and ink now triggered a wave of nausea, a constant reminder of the insurmountable task ahead. Food became a chore, each bite a forced act of self-preservation. Sleep offered no respite, only a relentless replay of my parents' damning words. I was trapped in a spiral of self-doubt and despair, teetering on the edge of an abyss. The pressure to succeed, once a driving force, now threatened to crush me entirely. I started experiencing panic attacks, my heart racing, my breath shallow, my vision blurring. The world seemed to shrink around me, closing in until I felt like I was suffocating. I was breaking, crumbling under the weight of their expectations and my own insecurities. One particularly bleak evening, I found myself standing on the edge of the old bridge that overlooked the river, the dark water swirling below like a bottomless pit. The wind whipped around me, carrying the scent of rain and decay. The city lights blurred in the distance, offering a false promise of warmth and connection. I stared into the churning water, contemplating the allure of oblivion. Would be so easy, I thought, to just let go, to surrender to the darkness and silence the voices in my head. The water looked cold, unforgiving, but also strangely peaceful. A way out. A final escape from the pain and disappointment that had become my constant companions. My hand tightened on the cold metal railing, my knuckles white. I leaned forward, drawn to the edge, the wind pushing me closer to the precipice. A single tear traced a path down my cheek, mingling with the rain. This was it, I thought. The end of the line. The final chapter in a story that had never truly begun. But then, a flicker of defiance ignited within me, a spark of the same stubborn determination that had driven me to succeed in the first place. I thought of all the sacrifices I had made, all the hard work I had put in, all the dreams I had dared to dream, and I realized that I couldn't let them win. I couldn't let their negativity define me. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me fail. I straightened my back, took a deep breath, and stepped away from the edge. The darkness still lingered, but it no longer held the same allure. I was still broken, still wounded, but I was not defeated. As I walked away from the bridge, a plan began to form in my mind, a plan born out of anger, desperation, and a fierce determination to reclaim my life. I knew that I couldn't change my family, couldn't force them to love or accept me, but I could control my own destiny. I could use their negativity as fuel to propel me forward, to prove them wrong, not for them, but for myself. I would become a doctor, not to earn their approval, but to show myself that I was capable of anything I set my mind to. And I would do it on my own terms, without their help, without their support, without their love. The first step was to sever all ties, to create a space where I could heal and rebuild my shattered confidence. I decided to move out, to find my own apartment, a sanctuary where I could escape the toxic atmosphere of my family home. I started looking for part-time jobs, anything to earn enough money to support myself. I researched scholarships and grants, determined to finance my education without relying on my parents' financial assistance. I immersed myself in my studies, focusing on the subjects that challenged me the most, determined to conquer my fears and prove my intellectual capabilities. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to piece myself back together. The scars of their betrayal would always remain, but they would serve as a reminder of my resilience, my strength, my unwavering determination to overcome adversity. The day they tried to break me was the day I decided to become unbreakable. And that's when I decided that the best revenge was becoming undeniably successful without them. And if, along the way, I could expose their hypocrisy and deceit, well, that would be a bonus. My silence didn't mean I was over it. It meant the game had just begun. The decision to move out was the first domino. I found a small, dingy apartment above a laundromat, the constant hum of the machines, a strange comfort against the silence of my own thoughts. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I took a job as a waitress, the long hours and demanding customers a welcome distraction from my inner turmoil. I learned to smile on command, to deflect rude comments with practiced ease, to compartmentalize my emotions and focus on the task at hand. It was an exercise in self-preservation, a way to build a shield against the pain. Meanwhile, medical school loomed, and I knew I had to find a way to pay for it. I spent hours scouring the internet for scholarships and grants, writing essays, filling out applications, pouring my heart and soul into every word. I refused to ask my parents for help, determined to prove that I could do this on my own. The days bled into weeks, the weeks into months, a relentless cycle of work, study, and quiet determination. But beneath the surface, the plan was taking shape. I started small, documenting every instance of Chad's cruelty, every snide remark, every belittling comment. I kept a journal, meticulously recording the dates, times, and specific details of each incident. I knew that if I was going to expose him, I needed irrefutable evidence. I invested in a small, discreet voice recorder cleverly disguised as a pen. I carried it with me everywhere, subtly activating it whenever I was around Chad or my parents. I knew it was a risk, that if they discovered it, my plan would be ruined. But I was careful, always mindful of my surroundings, always one step ahead. The recordings piled up, a damning collection of their callousness and indifference. There were times when I felt guilty, like I was betraying my own family. But then I would remember their words, their actions, the way they had made me feel, and the guilt would fade, replaced by a cold, unwavering resolve. I also started researching state laws regarding privacy and recording devices, determined to ensure that my actions were legal and wouldn't backfire. I learned about the concept of one-party consent, which meant that as long as I was a participant in the conversation, I was legally allowed to record it. This gave me a sense of security, knowing that I wasn't breaking the law. The more I learned, the more confident I became. I was no longer just a victim, but a strategist, a planner, a force to be reckoned with. I studied Chad's habits, his routines, his weaknesses. I observed his interactions with others, noting his tendency to exaggerate, to embellish, to outright lie. I discovered that he had a gambling problem, a secret that he desperately tried to hide from our parents. This was a potential goldmine, a vulnerability that I could exploit. The anticipation was building, a slow, steady burn that kept me awake at night. I knew that the timing had to be perfect, that I couldn't rush things. I needed to gather enough evidence to build an airtight case that would leave no room for doubt. One evening, I was at my parents' house for dinner, an obligatory gathering that I dreaded. Chad was in rare form, regaling everyone with stories of his supposed accomplishments, exaggerating his successes, downplaying his failures. I sat there, listening patiently, my pen recorder discreetly capturing every word. He launched into a story about a business deal he had supposedly orchestrated, a deal that had made him a fortune. But as he spoke, I noticed inconsistencies, details that didn't quite add up. I subtly steered the conversation, asking pointed questions, probing for weaknesses in his narrative. He became flustered, his story unraveling before my very eyes. My mother, sensing his discomfort, tried to intervene, but I politely deflected her attempts, pressing Chad for more details. Finally, he cracked, admitting that he had embellished the truth, that the deal hadn't been as successful as he had claimed. The look on my parents' faces was priceless, a mixture of disappointment and disbelief. I knew that this was just a small victory, but it was a sign that my plan was working. I was slowly eroding their trust in Chad, planting seeds of doubt that would eventually blossom into full-blown disillusionment. The hardest part was maintaining the facade, acting like everything was normal, pretending that I hadn't been deeply wounded by their actions. I had to smile, to laugh, to engage in polite conversation, all while knowing that I was secretly plotting their downfall. It was exhausting, emotionally draining, but I knew that I had to keep it up, that any slip-up could expose my plan. There were close calls, moments when I almost lost control, when I wanted to scream, to shout, to unleash all the pent-up anger that I had been suppressing for so long. But I held back, reminding myself of the bigger picture, of the ultimate goal. The image of their faces, their shocked, betrayed faces, kept me going. I started using a sophisticated audio editing software, learning how to clean up the recordings, to enhance the clarity, to remove any background noise. I wanted to make sure that the evidence was as compelling as possible, that there was no room for misinterpretation. I even consulted with a lawyer, a friend of a friend, who specialized in defamation and privacy law. I showed him some of the recordings, explained my plan, and asked for his advice. He was initially hesitant, warning me about the potential legal ramifications of my actions. But when he saw the extent of the abuse, the callousness of their behavior, he agreed to help me, offering guidance and support. He advised me to focus on the facts, to avoid making any emotional statements, to let the evidence speak for itself. The days turned into a countdown, each one bringing me closer to the moment of truth. I could feel the tension building, a palpable energy that filled the air. I knew that I had to be patient, to wait for the perfect opportunity to strike. And then it finally arrived. Chad was running for local office, a position he saw as a stepping stone to bigger and better things. He was campaigning on a platform of honesty and integrity, virtues that were conspicuously absent from his own life. The hypocrisy was unbearable. This was my chance. I meticulously compiled all the evidence I had gathered, the recordings, the journal entries, the financial records, everything neatly organized and presented in a clear, concise manner. I created a website, a digital repository of their deceit, a place where I could expose their lies to the world. I wrote a statement, a carefully crafted narrative that told my story, explained my motivations, and presented the evidence in a compelling way. I made sure to fact-check everything to ensure that every detail was accurate and verifiable. I wanted to be unimpeachable, to leave no room for doubt. The anticipation was almost unbearable. I knew that once I released this information, there would be no turning back. My life would be forever changed, but I was ready. I had spent months preparing for this moment. I was armed with the truth, and I was not afraid to use it. The day they tried to end me was the day their real nightmare began. The website was live. I had scheduled the launch for the day before the election, maximizing the impact, ensuring there was no time for damage control. It was a digital bomb, ticking away, ready to detonate and shatter their carefully constructed reality. But before I could unleash it, I needed one final piece of the puzzle: undeniable proof of Chad's financial impropriety. His gambling addiction was a tightly guarded secret, but I suspected it was bleeding into his campaign finances. If I could prove that, it would be the final nail in his political coffin. I started digging, discreetly accessing public records, campaign finance reports, anything that could shed light on his financial dealings. It was like navigating a maze, following a trail of breadcrumbs that led me deeper and deeper into his web of deceit. Then I got lucky. A friend of mine who worked at a local bank owed me a favor. I asked her to pull Chad's transaction history, promising complete anonymity. She hesitated, knowing the risks involved, but eventually agreed. The next day, she handed me a thumb drive, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. "Be careful," she whispered. "This could ruin him." I plugged the drive into my computer, my heart pounding in my chest. The data was overwhelming, a chaotic jumble of numbers and dates. It took me hours to sift through it all, to piece together the puzzle. And then I found it. A series of large, unexplained withdrawals, all made in the weeks leading up to the election. The money was being funneled into offshore accounts, hidden behind layers of shell corporations. It was blatant money laundering, a clear violation of campaign finance laws. This was it, the smoking gun. The evidence I needed to completely destroy him. But I couldn't just release the information anonymously. I needed to lure Chad into a trap, to force him to confess on record. I devised a plan, a risky gambit that could either make or break me. I knew that Chad was arrogant, overconfident, and easily manipulated. I decided to use those weaknesses against him. I sent him an anonymous email, claiming to be a disgruntled campaign worker who had evidence of his financial misconduct. I offered to sell him the information, promising to keep it out of the public eye in exchange for a large sum of money. I knew he would take the bait. He was too desperate to protect his reputation, too convinced of his own invincibility to resist. To further stoke his paranoia and manipulate him into meeting, I subtly implied in the email that the evidence was already in the hands of our local newspaper, and that they were preparing to publish it if I didn't deliver it to Chad personally. This added urgency would force his hand, pushing him to act rashly and without thinking. I chose the meeting location carefully, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, a place where we could talk without being overheard. It was isolated, desolate, the perfect setting for a confrontation. I arrived early, setting up hidden cameras and microphones, transforming the warehouse into a recording studio. I wanted to capture everything, to leave no room for deniability. The warehouse was dark, cold, the air thick with the smell of dust and decay. The only light came from the flickering street lamps outside, casting long, eerie shadows across the floor. The tension was palpable, a suffocating weight that pressed down on me. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I was walking into the lion's den, but I was ready. I had spent months preparing for this moment. I was armed with the truth, and I was not afraid to use it. When Chad arrived, he was visibly agitated, his face pale, his eyes darting nervously around the room. He was alone, no bodyguards, no entourage. He was clearly desperate. "Where is it?" he demanded, his voice trembling slightly. "Where's the evidence?" I smiled, a cold, unwavering smile that sent a shiver down his spine. "Let's just say I have everything I need to ensure your little political career never happens," I replied, my voice calm and controlled. "But I'm a reasonable person, Chad. I'm willing to make a deal." I laid out my terms, demanding a full confession, a public apology, and his immediate withdrawal from the election. He scoffed, refusing to comply. "You have nothing," he sneered, trying to regain his composure. "Even if you did, no one would believe you." I simply smiled and pressed a button on a remote control, activating the hidden cameras. A large screen behind me flickered to life, displaying a live feed of his bank transactions, the offshore accounts, the money laundering. His face drained of color, he was trapped. "Now do you believe me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He started to panic, his eyes wild with desperation. He lunged at me, trying to grab the remote to shut down the cameras. But I was ready for him. I sidestepped his attack, sending him stumbling to the ground. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, Chad," I said, my voice hardening. "Just confess and this can all be over." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with hatred. "You'll never get away with this," he spat. "I'll ruin you, I'll destroy you." I simply smiled. "You already tried," I said, "and you failed." He knew he was defeated. The fight had gone out of him. He slumped to the ground, his head in his hands, sobbing uncontrollably. "What do you want from me?" he wailed. "Just tell me what you want." "I want the truth," I said, "and I want everyone to know it." I leaned in close, my voice barely audible. "The game is over, Chad. It's time to face the consequences." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. He knew that I had won. I activated the recording equipment, the red light blinking ominously in the darkness. "All right, Chad," I said, my voice cold and unwavering. "Let's start from the beginning," the confession began. Every lie, every deceit, every betrayal laid bare in the cold, unforgiving light of the warehouse. As his words echoed around the empty space, I knew that my moment of triumph was at hand. But little did I know there was one final twist, one last betrayal, waiting just around the corner. A betrayal that would test my resolve and push me to the very brink. 'Cause as Chad confessed, a new player entered the game. The sound of a car engine echoed outside. Headlights cut through the darkness. And my parents stepped out, their faces grim, their eyes fixed on me. They knew, and they weren't here to save Chad. They were here to silence me, forever. The headlights bore into me, blinding. My parents emerged from the car, their faces etched with a chilling resolve I'd never witnessed before. It wasn't concern for Chad I saw in their eyes, but a desperate, calculating glint. They knew the truth somehow. Chad must have called them, a last-ditch effort to salvage his crumbling world. But instead of offering him a lifeline, they came to silence me. "What is the meaning of this?" my mother demanded, her voice dangerously low. "We heard everything." My father stepped forward, his gaze cold and hard. "This has gone far enough." The air crackled with unspoken threats. I knew with a sickening certainty that they were willing to do anything to protect their precious image, their carefully constructed facade of perfection. And that included protecting Chad, even if it meant sacrificing me. "You don't understand," I pleaded, my voice trembling. "He's been lying to you for years, I have proof," my mother scoffed. "Lies, you're the one spewing lies, you're trying to ruin him." My father advanced, his hand reaching inside his coat. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had to think fast. I glanced at Chad, still slumped on the floor, his face buried in his hands. He was useless, consumed by his own despair. I was on my own. "I'm not going to let you do this," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I'm not going to let you silence me." I grabbed the remote control, my finger hovering over the upload button. "If you try to stop me, I'll release everything. The recordings, the financial records, everything." My parents froze, their eyes widening in alarm. They knew I wasn't bluffing. They knew I was willing to burn everything to the ground. A tense standoff ensued, the silence broken only by Chad's muffled sobs. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice laced with venom. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me," I replied, my voice cold and unwavering. The seconds ticked by, each one an eternity. I could see the wheels turning in their heads, the desperate calculations. They knew they were cornered. They knew that if I released the information, their world would come crashing down around them. With a sigh of resignation, my father lowered his hand. "All right," he said, his voice defeated. "You win." But I knew that this wasn't a victory. It was a truce, a temporary reprieve. They would never forgive me for this. They would always see me as a threat, a loose end that needed to be dealt with. But for now, it was enough. I pressed the upload button. The website went live. The truth was out there. The fallout was immediate and devastating. Chad's political career imploded. His campaign was in ruins, his reputation shattered. He was forced to withdraw from the election, his dreams of power and influence evaporating before his eyes. The local newspaper picked up the story, running a front-page expose that detailed his financial improprieties and his long history of deception. The scandal spread like wildfire, engulfing him in a blaze of shame and humiliation. His friends abandoned him, his colleagues shunned him, and his own parents turned their backs on him. He became a pariah, a symbol of corruption and deceit. His face, once beaming with arrogance and ambition, was now a mask of despair. He lost everything. My parents, too, suffered the consequences of his actions. Their reputation was tarnished, their social standing diminished. They were ostracized by their community, forced to endure the whispers and the judgmental stares. The facade of perfection they had so carefully cultivated for so many years was shattered, revealing the ugly truth beneath. They tried to deny it to deflect blame, but the evidence was overwhelming. They were complicit in Chad's lies, and they paid the price. As for me, I emerged from the wreckage, scarred but not broken. The truth had set me free, but it had also cost me dearly. My relationship with my parents was irrevocably damaged. The trust was gone, replaced by a deep sense of betrayal. But I had no regrets. I had done what I had to do to protect myself, to expose the truth, to seek justice. I watched as their world crumbled, as their lies unraveled, as they were forced to face the consequences of their actions. And I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. They lost everything, I just smiled. Revenge isn't sweet. It's necessary. It's the bitter medicine you swallow when the world has poisoned you. It's the fire you walk through to emerge stronger on the other side. It's the acknowledgement that you will no longer be a victim. It's taking back control. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.